Right now, at this exact moment, across the entire Persian Gulf region, Iran has activated the most sophisticated electronic warfare operation in maritime history. Commercial aircraft are reporting complete GPS failure over international waters. Air traffic controllers in Dubai, Doha, and Bahrain are manually vectoring hundreds of flights using backup navigation systems not deployed since the 1990s. The United States Fifth Fleet headquarters in Manama just issued an unprecedented alert warning that GPS-dependent weapon systems may be unreliable across a 500-mile radius. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims this is a defensive exercise. The U.S. Central Command calls it an act of aggression against international navigation infrastructure. Both cannot be telling the truth. This is not a localized jamming incident. This is deliberate, coordinated, and designed to demonstrate that Iran can blind American precision-guided munitions across the most strategically vital waterway on Earth. Let me walk you through exactly what happened in the last 6 hours. At 0342 hours Gulf Standard Time this morning, the first anomaly appeared. A Qatar Airways Airbus A350 en route from Doha to Mumbai reported complete loss of GPS signal at flight level 390, approximately 80 nautical miles southeast of Kish Island. The pilot initially attributed this to equipment malfunction and switched to backup GPS receiver. That unit also showed no satellite acquisition. Within 8 minutes, 4 additional commercial aircraft reported identical failures. By 0400 hours, air traffic control centers across the Gulf region had received GPS failure reports from 17 aircraft simultaneously. The affected zone formed a near-perfect circle centered on Iran's coastal city of Bandar Abbas with a radius extending 280 nautical miles in all directions. At 0415 hours, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Paul Hamilton, operating in international waters 45 miles north of the Omani coast, reported degraded GPS accuracy with position errors exceeding 200 meters. U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters immediately ordered all vessels to switch to inertial navigation systems and activated backup timing sources for weapon systems dependent on GPS synchronization. By 0430 hours, the affected radius had expanded to 320 nautical miles, now encompassing the entire Strait of Hormuz, most of the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and extending into Pakistani airspace. Commercial carriers including Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways, and Oman Air began implementing contingency routing plans diverting flights around the affected zone. At 0458 hours, Iran's Tasnim news agency, closely affiliated with the Revolutionary Guards, published a statement claiming IRGC naval forces were conducting electronic warfare exercises in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. The statement provided no end time for the exercise and offered no advance notification despite international aviation safety protocols requiring such warnings. At 0502 hours, U.S. Central Command posted on social media platform X that Iran was conducting unlawful GPS interference, affecting civilian aviation safety and military operations. The statement characterized the jamming as reckless and dangerous. By 0600 hours, satellite tracking data from commercial flight monitoring services showed 73 aircraft had diverted from planned routes to avoid the affected area, creating cascading delays across Middle Eastern and South Asian aviation networks. To understand what Iran has actually deployed and why this represents a strategic threshold crossing, you need to understand the technology and infrastructure required to jam GPS signals across 300-plus nautical miles. GPS satellites orbit at approximately 20,200 kilometers altitude, broadcasting signals at extremely low power levels by the time they reach Earth's surface. A GPS receiver on your phone or in an aircraft detects signals measuring roughly negative 130 decibels relative to 1 milliwatt. This means GPS is extraordinarily vulnerable to jamming because even relatively modest ground-based transmitters can overpower satellite signals across wide areas. Iran has been developing electronic warfare capabilities specifically designed to counter American precision-guided munitions for over 2 decades. The system Iran is almost certainly employing is a network of ground-based transmitters positioned along its southern coast, broadcasting noise or false signals on the L1 and L2 frequencies used by GPS satellites. Intelligence assessments from 2024 identified at least 6 major Iranian electronic warfare facilities along the Hormuz Strait coastline equipped with high-power transmitters capable of disrupting GPS reception across hundreds of kilometers. These facilities are hardened against airstrikes, positioned in mountainous terrain, and distributed to prevent single-point failure. The power levels required to achieve 300 nautical mile jamming radius suggest Iran is operating transmitters in the 10 to 50 kilowatt range, possibly coordinated through centralized timing to create interference patterns maximizing coverage. What makes this particularly sophisticated is that Iran appears to be jamming civilian and military GPS frequencies simultaneously. Civilian GPS operates on the L1 frequency at 1575, 42 MHz. Military GPS uses both L1 and the encrypted L2 frequency at 12/27, 60 MHz with anti-jamming features. Successfully degrading military GPS requires significantly more power and technical sophistication than disrupting civilian receivers. The fact that U.S. Navy vessels reported degraded accuracy indicates Iran has deployed sufficient power to overwhelm even military receivers equipped with anti-jam technology. This capability matters strategically because virtually every American precision weapon depends on GPS for terminal guidance. The Joint Direct Attack munition, which converts unguided bombs into precision weapons, relies on GPS for targeting accuracy. Tomahawk cruise missiles use GPS for mid-course navigation. Even aircraft carrier operations depend on GPS for precise navigation and coordinated strike package timing. By demonstrating the ability to deny GPS across the entire Gulf region, Iran is signaling that American technological superiority and precision strike may not function in this operational environment. Iran's jamming infrastructure also reveals sophisticated understanding of American vulnerability. The U.S. military has become profoundly dependent on GPS over the past 3 decades, with thousands of weapon systems, navigation platforms, and communication networks relying on satellite positioning and timing. Creating a GPS-denied environment forces American forces to revert to backup systems that are less accurate, more manpower-intensive, and significantly slower to employ. The strategic context here reveals multiple, overlapping calculations from different actors. From Iran's perspective, this electronic warfare demonstration serves several simultaneous objectives. First, it reminds the United States and its Gulf allies that Iran possesses asymmetric capabilities that can impose costs on superior conventional forces without firing a shot. Jamming GPS doesn't kill anyone, doesn't destroy aircraft, doesn't trigger automatic retaliation, but it does disrupt operations, create safety hazards, and demonstrate technological capability. Second, this operation sends a message to domestic audiences and regional adversaries that Iran is not defenseless, despite overwhelming American military superiority. The IRGC has faced criticism within Iran for perceived weakness in confronting American and Israeli pressure, demonstrating the ability to blind American precision weapons across the region's most vital strategic corridor provides the Revolutionary Guards with domestic propaganda value. Third, Iran may be conducting realistic testing of electronic warfare capabilities it would employ in actual conflict. By activating these systems during peacetime exercises, Iran gathers data on American responses, tests coordination between distributed jamming sites, and evaluates effectiveness against real-world targets including military and civilian receivers. According to Dr. Brian Clark, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and former special assistant to the Chief of Naval Operations, GPS jamming represents one of Iran's most cost-effective capabilities for countering American military advantages. In a 2025 analysis for the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, Clark argued that Iran's investment in electronic warfare infrastructure provides deterrent value far exceeding the relatively modest procurement and operating costs. Iran can deny American precision strike capability across the Gulf for millions of dollars in equipment costs, while the American military has invested hundreds of billions in GPS-dependent weapon systems now rendered less effective. From the American perspective, this jamming operation creates several policy dilemmas. The United States could theoretically strike Iranian electronic warfare facilities with cruise missiles or stealth aircraft, but such strikes would represent major escalation over what Iran characterizes as defensive exercises. The optics of destroying Iranian infrastructure to restore GPS function would be difficult to justify internationally, particularly since Iran is conducting operations from its own territory and not technically attacking anyone. The United States could deploy additional electronic warfare assets to the region attempting to jam the jammers, but this risks escalation spiral where both sides continuously increase power and sophistication. According to Anthony Cordesman, Emeritus Chair in Strategy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Iran's GPS jamming demonstrates the vulnerability of American expeditionary forces to relatively low-cost asymmetric capabilities that don't require direct military confrontation. In testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee in early 2026, Cordesman argued that the Pentagon has underinvested in electronic warfare capabilities and over-relied on GPS for too many critical functions. The Gulf states also face calculations. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait host American military bases and depend on American security guarantees, but they also maintain pragmatic relationships with Iran and prefer avoiding direct confrontation. Iran's jamming operation affects their airspace and commercial aviation but doesn't directly target their territory. They must balance supporting American responses against escalating tensions that could spiral into conflict affecting their countries directly. From their perspective, Rechtstrobarns, Merstadt, Andar Derbizna, Chokerstatri, Reichkein, Rechtstat, and Bieskreis ideally resolves through diplomatic channels where Iran ends the jamming exercise after making its point. The United States avoids military escalation and normal operations resume without shots fired. Historical precedent offers partial guidance, but no perfect analogs. During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, both sides employed electronic warfare, including radar jamming and communications disruption, but GPS didn't exist as a military capability at that time. Russia has extensively jammed GPS in Syria, Ukraine, and even during military exercises near NATO borders, but those operations occurred in active conflict zones or involved direct Russian territorial interests rather than international waters. China has demonstrated GPS jamming capabilities in the South China Sea, but generally limits duration and scope to avoid major international incidents. What makes Iran's current operation unprecedented is the scale, the location in international airspace and waters, and the duration extending beyond brief demonstrations into sustained operational effect. There are 3 scenarios for how this develops over the next 48 to 72 hours, each with distinct probability based on current indicators and strategic logic. Scenario 1 is diplomatic de-escalation, where Iran ends the jamming exercise within 24 to 36 hours after demonstrating capability, and the United States accepts this as peacetime electronic warfare testing without military response. This pathway requires Iran to characterize the operation as time-limited exercise and announce conclusion with advance notice, allowing commercial aviation to resume normal routing. It requires the United States to issue strong rhetorical condemnation while avoiding kinetic response, treating this as aggressive but not illegal since Iran conducted operations from its own territory. The probability of this scenario is approximately 45%. The strategic logic supporting this outcome is that both sides achieved objectives without crossing into direct military confrontation. Iran demonstrated asymmetric capability and domestic strength. The United States gathered intelligence on Iranian electronic warfare, infrastructure, and capabilities. Neither side benefits from escalation at this moment given ongoing diplomatic efforts regarding Iran's nuclear program and broader regional tensions. The obstacles to this scenario include domestic pressure on both governments to respond forcefully, risk that extended jamming causes aviation accident creating casualties and political demands for retaliation, and possibility that Iran interprets restrained American response as weakness, encouraging future operations. Scenario 2 involves controlled military escalation, where the United States conducts limited strikes against Iranian electronic warfare facilities to restore GPS function, and Iran responds with symbolic retaliation, avoiding mass American casualties. This pathway requires the United States to frame strikes as defensive action protecting international navigation safety rather than offensive escalation. It requires surgical strikes using standoff weapons like Tomahawk cruise missiles, minimizing American aircraft exposure to Iranian air defenses. It requires Iran to conduct limited retaliation such as ballistic missile strikes against unpopulated areas of American bases, or harassment of naval vessels without sinking ships or causing casualties. The probability of this scenario is approximately 35%. The strategic logic is that both sides demonstrate resolve and military capability while avoiding full-scale war. The United States shows it will kinetically respond to threats against navigation infrastructure. Iran shows it will retaliate against American strikes but calibrates response to avoid triggering massive American counter-retaliation. Both sides can claim victory to domestic audiences while actually exercising restraint. The risks include miscalculation, where strikes cause more damage or casualties than intended, Iranian retaliation escalating beyond controlled parameters if domestic pressure demands stronger response, and allies, particularly Gulf states, opposing American military action, creating diplomatic complications. Scenario 3 is catastrophic escalation, where GPS jamming is prelude to broader Iranian military operation, or where American response triggers Iranian retaliation, spiraling into regional conflict. This pathway could involve Iran using GPS-denied environment to conduct attacks on Gulf shipping or American naval vessels while precision-guided defenses are degraded, the United States conducting large-scale strikes against multiple Iranian military facilities beyond just jamming infrastructure, or Iranian retaliation activating proxy forces including Hezbollah against Israel, Houthi forces against Saudi Arabia and UAE, and militia groups against American forces in Iraq and Syria. The probability of this scenario is approximately 20%. The nightmare logic is that Iran has been planning coordinated operation where GPS jamming represents first phase degrading American capabilities before follow-on attacks, or that limited American strikes trigger Iranian hardliner demands for massive retaliation that the government cannot resist politically. Within 72 hours, we could see ballistic missile exchanges, naval combat in the Gulf, and proxy conflicts erupting across the region simultaneously. Multiple factors could push events toward this trajectory, including intelligence indicating Iran is preparing additional operations beyond jamming, accidental collision, or incident involving American and Iranian forces in GPS-denied environment, or domestic political pressures in Tehran or Washington demanding forceful action that leaders cannot contain. Watch for 5 critical indicators in the next 24 to 72 hours that will reveal which scenario is materializing. First, jamming duration and scope. If Iran announces exercise conclusion within 24 hours and GPS function restores across the region, scenario 1 becomes overwhelming probability. If jamming continues beyond 48 hours or expands to additional frequencies or geographic areas, escalation scenarios become more likely. Second, diplomatic communications. If American and Iranian officials engage through Swiss intermediaries or Omani facilitators in next 24 hours, diplomatic track remains viable. If both sides issue only public condemnations without private engagement, military options become more likely. Third, American military movements. If additional aircraft carriers, bomber wings, or electronic warfare units deploy to region, this signals Washington is preparing kinetic response options. If force posture remains unchanged, restraint remains likely. Fourth, Iranian domestic messaging. If Supreme Leader Khamenei makes public speech in next 48 hours, his language will indicate whether Iran seeks confrontation or demonstration. If he emphasizes Iranian strength and defensive capabilities without threatening further action, de-escalation remains possible. If he issues ultimatums or threatens additional operations, escalation probability increases. Fifth, international reactions, particularly from Russia and China. If Moscow and Beijing issue statements supporting Iran's right to conduct defensive exercises, they are providing political cover suggesting they believe this remains controlled. If they call for de-escalation or remain silent, they may possess intelligence suggesting higher escalation risk than publicly apparent. I am tracking this minute by minute through multiple monitoring systems including satellite tracking of aircraft diversions, military force movements, and official statements from all parties. When Iran announces conclusion of this jamming operation, or when the United States announces response measures, when diplomatic channels activate, or when military forces move, you will understand the significance immediately. With analysis, you cannot find in mainstream coverage that will treat this as isolated incident rather than strategic demonstration. Subscribe to this channel right now and activate all notifications. This is not about entertainment. This is about understanding developments that will determine whether we are heading toward regional stability or the largest military confrontation in the Gulf since Operation Desert Storm. When GPS signals restore, or when missiles fly, when carriers move, or talks begin, you need to understand what it means and why it matters. Hit that subscribe button because the next 48 hours will determine everything. Drop a comment with your analysis. Do you think the United States will strike Iranian jamming facilities or accept this as peacetime electronic warfare? Do you think Iran is testing capabilities for future conflict or demonstrating strength for diplomatic leverage? Do you think this ends quietly or escalates into broader confrontation? I read every comment and your perspectives matter. The jamming continues at this moment. Commercial aviation across the Middle East is disrupted. American forces are operating in GPS-degraded environment. Iran has demonstrated it can blind precision weapons across the entire Gulf region. The next move determines whether this becomes footnote or whether this becomes the incident that changed everything. Thanks for watching. Stay informed. The crisis is not over.